Welcome to the Tuesday, August 17th edition of the Rotowire NFL podcast brought to you by WinBet. I'm Joe Bartel. You can follow me at JB Fantasy Sports. Alongside me, as always, every Tuesday, Jake Letarski. You can follow me at RotoJake. Before we get started, we should really post or at least talk about the fact that we have started our own underdog league for everyone out there listening, right?
Yeah. So I set it up today. I think tomorrow is technically the last day you can do a private underdog league. They're, one of our sponsors. It's a good site. I ran a couple drafts. I tweeted earlier today. I did a best ball with the 11th pick, and they left me Nick Chubb and then Saquon Barkley coming back. So I love that start.
Nice.
At 11. So instantly I fell in love with the platform because of that reason. And then beyond that, so it's the last day to do private, and then the clock will go from 8 hours to 4 hours starting at some point tomorrow. So I figured I'd get one in, and if it fills quick, maybe I'll squeeze one more in because they're fun, they're easy. Why not?
So that's a good thing. Okay, so $5 entry fee, right? It's going to be in the Jake and Joe, the underdog format, $5 entry fee. Top six get paid out $10, right? And is this part of the $1 million thing?
It's top three getting paid out in our 10-team league. Yeah, this isn't the $1 million thing, but for another $5, you can do their $1 million thing.
Right.
So
great.
It all works out.
And then in this format, or at least this best ball, it's an 8-hour draft time slot, is what you're saying, every 8 hours?
Except that's going to cut to 4, I think, by Thursday to speed things along a little bit. It's really easy to queue up your players. You can do it on your phone. It's
cool.
It's a simple thing to join.
Yeah, definitely check that out. It's on both of our Twitters right now. We'll probably link it in the description or some sort on the YouTube video. Maybe not the YouTube video, but certainly in the podcast, I can find a way to link it too. And we'll be pushing it out there as well when this podcast goes live or officially is posted on like Spotify and things like that.
I think there are only a few spots left. I think like 3 last time I checked. And
Let's go. We're so popular.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, it'll start when the league fills. So, but then you have an 8-hour clock. You have 8 hours to take McCaffrey if you happen to be at work when the thing starts or whatnot.
Okay.
So, gotcha.
Yeah. Perfect. That's perfect for my schedule. As you can see, everyone watching on YouTube right now live. I'm at home. This is the first live podcast that I've done here at the apartment. The 7-week-old child is out getting coffee at the moment with the wife, which is fantastic. So we have a good 45 minutes to maybe bang this out before a crying baby comes home. So we'll try to get that through as best we can before we really dive into the meat of the podcast, which is identifying players past ADP of 200, guys that we like, Jake and I like. We'll get a word from our sponsors, WinBet. If there's one thing we appreciate here at Rotowire, it's making good decisions, and even more so making the right decision. Listen up, folks. I have an incredible offer for you with Rotowire's newest partner, WinBet, the premier digital casino and sportsbook app. WinBet is now exclusive sponsor for Rotowire's fantasy podcast. WinBet brings you all the latest action with a user-friendly interface, moneyline bets, boosted parlays, over-unders, round robins, live betting, and so much more right at your fingertips. Want a break from sports betting? We could just head into WinBet's digital casino and take a spin on the roulette, double down on blackjack, or slam the slots. WinBet is currently available in 6 states: Colorado, Indiana, Michigan, New Jersey, Tennessee, Virginia, while rapidly expanding. At WinBet, the possibilities are limitless. WinBet is currently offering all Rotowire listeners a risk-free bet up to $500 on your first wager. Download WinBet now. That's WYNNBET. WinBet, the exclusive partner for Rotowire's fantasy podcast. Before we dive into those over or past 200 ADP guys that we're targeting, of course, we got to start with that news and notes from training camp. Again, as we get closer to the regular season, Jake and I will be taking over the mantle of guys you're going to be picking up from free agency wire and who you're targeting. We'll probably recap the Monday night game as well. It's nice to say the Monday night game as opposed to last year where there's like 3 or 4 because of all the COVID changes and everything else.
I'm a night owl. I don't mind Monday night doubleheaders. I extend it,
that's
whatever.
True.
I sit there, I work on the outline for the next day, and then just watch some football. I miss it. I'm ready to get back in that routine again.
Yeah, we did have, obviously, week 1 of the preseason. Week 2 will be taking place this week. Then we have week 3 afterwards. We're getting close. It's getting that time period for at least people who are really into fantasy football. Well, you're going to have a nice little stretch here where you can kind of get yourself set and prepare. And obviously, we have to keep following the news and notes that happen from training camp. The biggest one from at least Tuesday is that Chase Claypool evidently went down in camp. He had to be helped off the field. It appears to be a lower body injury of some sort. Mike Garofalo from the NFL Network said he didn't suffer a significant injury. Mm-hmm. Although, again, if he had to be helped off and it's a lower body one, this could be something that ends up sticking around for a little bit longer than you might have hoped for.
Yeah. At first, it was like, DEFCON 1's the serious one, right? DEFCON 5's calm. Anyway,
I don't. Yeah, I think. Yeah, I
DEFCON
think so.
level. At first, it was looking bad. Like he couldn't put any weight on it. He had to have Roethlisberger and Ebron kind of carry him off the field. It was funny. I was sitting next to DJ Trainer in the office, and he asked me, "What's your Chase Claypool exposure like?" And I hadn't seen it yet. I was working on something else, and I go, "You know what? It's not actually any because I'm pretty much always taking Deontay Johnson in the 4th or 5th round when I can. So that means like I'm not going to take another Steelers receiver the next round later. I love Deontay Johnson, so even if it's 1 or 2 rounds later, I haven't been taking him." And then he told me what happened here. So I looked into it and I kind of followed the saga a little bit more. I wasn't putting any weight on his leg here. Updated after practice that he's being evaluated for an injury, of course. There wasn't really any video or anything of it. Then Mike Garofalo said he didn't suffer a significant leg injury. And now I think the latest is
minor ankle sprain, actually.
Yeah, Adam Schefter says minor ankle sprain. So I had all my analysis on like, okay, what do we do if Claypool goes down for 6 weeks? What's going to happen here? Or misses half the year or has to go on IR. But I don't know. That analysis is kind of a little bit out the window at this point here. I mean, I love Deontay Johnson. I think I've made that known. I think he's going to correct those drop issues, get 180 targets and be a PPR monster this year. So he's number one. If anything, Claypool missing time would help Juju Smith-Schuster a little bit because it would help me be more confident in taking him because more targets are there. Deontay Johnson's going to get his as the number one target no matter what. And, maybe it would help Ebron a little bit, but Ebron's barely being taken in 12-team formats here. So, and obviously then Claypool's ADP and everything along with it takes a major, major hit. Would it be enough for James Washington to become a fantasy factor? I don't know.
That was the name I thought of too, because he was asking for a trade, right? I mean, he wanted out.
Rumor. Yeah, he wanted out. He's like, okay, well, if I'm not gonna, it would have been a perfect Hard Knocks moment or something if we had the Steelers this year. But
we get the Cowboys, don't worry.
Yeah, I forget who it was for the Browns. It's just like if you're not gonna play me, trade me. And then, but then he faded into irrelevance afterwards. That's why I can't remember his name. But no, James Washington could have had a chance, but I don't know. It's still to take him in a 12-team league would have been a little bit of a stretch for me.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think there's a few landing spots. When that news broke with James Washington, I was on air with SiriusXM with Mario, and we were talking about a couple of places. And I don't think the Steelers are going to trade him, so that it doesn't really matter. But this injury, if Claypool will miss time, I think Washington steps up. And you mentioned Ebron as well, especially in a PPR perspective. I think Ebron in those first 2 weeks or so would be a really good candidate for our show, as we're talking about guys you can pick up. I would imagine in most leagues, Ebron is not going to be drafted, but could be a relevant start in week 1 or week 2 if they're missing a guy like Claypool, who is their touchdown guy of all the wide receivers.
Yeah, Ebron always finds a way to make it onto our waiver wire show every single season. He's at that fringe replacement line for tight ends, and we know he's athletic. He can be a red zone threat. He had all those touchdowns that 1 year. Hasn't quite had it since in his time here at Pittsburgh, but you never know. His name will come up at some point, some Tuesday down the road for sure.
Absolutely. Moving on to another big name, at least at running back, we have Saquon Barkley, who seems to be progressing well, participating in 7-on-7 drills. I don't know if we're going to see Saquon Barkley at all in the preseason, and there was concern even up to 2 weeks ago that he might not be around for week 1. I think the fact that he's going to be available and participating in these 7-on-7 drills would indicate he is set to go for week 1, more or less, right?
Yeah, I mean 7-on-7, of course, that's different from getting hits. There's no trenches to dig through or anything like that. I was always jealous as a lineman in high school watching these guys play 7-on-7. It looked like they were having so much fun while I got to push the sled around. But no, that's neither here nor there. No, Saquon Barkley's ADP seems like it's continuing to rise. If you look over the last 2 weeks in the NFFC, he's up to number 8 overall. So he's passed Eckler, Tyreek Hill, Devonta Adams, even Nick Chubb and Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones had a little bit of an injury to worry about here. But no, like I said, I got Saquon Barkley as the second pick of the second round in my last underdog best ball. I'm thrilled about that. Very, very early on, I wasn't ready to take him in the top 5, maybe even top 6. I don't, there's that slight risk level that necessarily that doesn't really make me want to use that high a draft capital when there are safer options out there. But once you get to the back end of the first round and the early part of the second round, I have no problem taking a guy like this who does have RB1 ceiling. I don't think anyone will argue with the fact that he potentially has RB1 ceiling.
Yeah, I had Saquon Barkley ranked 10 among my season rankings. So guys afterwards, Austin Eckler, Travis Kelce, Aaron Jones, Antonio Gibson, Edwards-Helaire. And this is in a half-point setting for the Yahoo stuff, but I think Eckler would be the only one that really jumps up if it's a full point PPR. I know some people are high in Aaron Jones, and I get that throughout those first 2 weeks or 3 weeks last year. Aaron Jones was a top 2 scorer, I think, maybe even number 1 overall, and we saw it dissipate a little bit. There's going to be points where Aaron Jones misses time, whether it be to injury or the Packers just choose to give him 10 carries in a game and he only gets 60 yards. I just get wary about that. I understand the upside for Aaron Jones. And this goes back to the NFFC draft I did last week where he was the number 4 overall pick. I get the upside entirely, but there is some concern that Aaron Jones can have off days. And that's where Saquon Barkley in that offense, I think, is going to be more or less a guy that you can consistently rely on. Maybe won't give you the upper echelon scores that Aaron Jones does, but will be somebody that gets you that 10 to 12, 15 points that you want on that first overall pick or first round pick, I should say.
Yeah, I almost see Jones as more of a safety pick because he's going to get there. But like you said, it might be staggered.
You think Jones is more safe than Saquon Barkley?
Well, I would still take Saquon before Jones. That's a tough one. There's not as much. He might have some nagging injuries, but there's not. He hasn't had, as far as I know, Aaron Jones hasn't had a full on knee rebuild, has he?
No, but he misses time so often. I feel like Matt LaFleur likes to have AJ Dillon involved, and the fact that we're drafting Allen around 7 or 8 seems to think other people will have AJ Dillon involved in that offense. I don't know. I think the workload gets a little bit worrisome for me, and I also believe that Aaron Jones is just as injury prone as any other running back is. So I would rather have Saquon Barkley, even behind that offensive line and the poor quarterback in Daniel Jones.
I wanted to fact check it there. I guess Jones missed 2 games last year, played all 16 the year before, and then played 12 and 12 in his first 2 seasons. But his first 2 seasons, he wasn't, really a huge factor. He was just kind of
right. He wasn't the guy
in the offense. Yeah. Okay. And what else do we got here for camp news today?
Well, we have Dak Prescott is likely going to be not playing the preseason. I don't care about that whatsoever, but if you were watching, if you were watching for the preseason to make sure you felt good on Dak Prescott, guess that option's not there for you. Oh well.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it makes Hard Knocks a little less interesting, but does nothing for my fantasy ranks. I ended up quarterbacks were going pretty high in the best ball last best ball I did on underdog. So I ended up taking Dak in maybe the 6th round, 5th round, something along those lines. I'm fine with him as my quarterback in that range. It was another one of those last of a tier type situations for me.
Yeah, for sure. Right there with you on that one. And then Philip Lindsay, evidently the carry guy, like who's going to be getting the majority of the carries for the Texans. And then David Johnson actually participating in 3rd down role capacity. Okay, great. Last we saw the Texans, Mark Ingram was listed number 1 on the depth chart, and David Johnson was like all the way on a 3 or 4. Well, we know the Texans are stupid and arguably not even an NFL franchise at this point. So I'm not stunned at all by that. But now we're having reports that Philip Lindsay's going to be the guy that gets the carry opportunities, and David Johnson's more of the pass catching specialist. At least that might matter more because the Texans are going to be passing a lot, considering they suck.
Yeah, I mean, at least that's kind of how it lined up in the first preseason game. And I try not to overreact too much for preseason, but when you get to, one of my deep sleepers today is pretty much a preseason overreaction here. So Philip Lindsay, he's getting a little bit of hype. It looks like Mark Ingram's going to make the roster. He was the one who was rested, which was odd. And
they better make him have the roster. I mean, they gave him a stupid amount of money for a super old guy that's not very good. So yeah,
stupid amount of money.
He's a culture guy. It was a culture signing.
It was a 1-year, $3 million contract.
That's stupid money for a guy that will not be able to play at the running back position.
Yeah.
That's like Frank Gore stupid money.
All right, fair enough. So Philip Lindsay, back to this guy. Where did I have this tab? I'm mixing up all my tabs trying to find contracts. He's sitting at 148 in ADP over the last couple of weeks. So you're taking him, I don't know, around RB6 or something like that. And you don't have a lot of high expectations for him. He could be your first drop. I mean, I can see it, but he's not an exciting guy. He's not, to me, there's not just a ridiculous amount of upside because I don't trust the Texans to use him right. I think this defense is horrible, and you're right, they'll use their pass catching backs more, which Lindsay did almost out of necessity in Denver, though. Now, when they have someone like David Johnson who's better built for that, I don't think they use him for that as much. It's not like he's past his prime or anything. He's had, his yards per carry, meaningless stat, but yards per carry and yards per target have all gone down considerably each year in the National Football League. So there's not a ton to get excited about. He's a guy that, maybe gets you 6 to 8, standard points in a given week, if the chips fall as they may. So, like I said, in the end, I'm not really overreacting to this preseason news, but Lindsay could come on my board in one of those like 18 round drafts or something like that, towards the end, if I feel like my running backs are weak and I want to take a safety pick, Not a safety pick because, again, he's Philip Lindsay. He could lose his job. He could underperform. There's all these bad things that could happen there too. But he also seems to at least have the opportunity to get maybe 10 touches a game. And, there's some value in that, I suppose.
I just don't want anything to do with that offense except for one player. And I'm not going to spoil anything for later in the show.
Mm-hmm.
But there are 31 NFL teams and then there's the Texans. I truly believe some college teams could beat them right now. That's just a miserable franchise at the moment, and that's with or without Deshaun Watson at this point. I mean, I guess if Watson does play, that's different. I'm just not anticipating that's the case. So I want nothing to do with the Texans, and I think they are going to be garbage for some time, the way they are operating, at least at the front office end of things, the ownership. So only other bit of news that I saw as well was that Kerryon Johnson was released by the Eagles. I would imagine people listening to the podcast are like, wait, Kerryon Johnson was with the Eagles? Yes, that second round running back for the Lions did sign with the Eagles in the offseason, or was even maybe a pickup last year, and was kind of factoring in as the third or fourth guy behind Kenny Gainwell in that Eagles rotation. Kerryon Johnson injured his knee, which happens every year, and that was kaput for his career or tenure with the Eagles. I could see Kerryon catching on with the Dolphins or the Cardinals or the Falcons, even though the Falcons just signed Donta Foreman. One of those teams who really do, the Rams too. I mean, like one of those teams that really do need a running back. There's a draft pedigree that kind of gets these guys more opportunities than they probably should. But also, I think Kerryon can be good when he's healthy. It's just an issue of he's never healthy, and of course, this knee injury doesn't make things any better.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, looking at that Eagles backfield, I think that's a team that might underperform a little bit this year on a whole. I have no Miles Sanders, and I don't really plan to get any Miles Sanders. If I get any Miles Sanders, it'll be at the end like, oh, look at all my teams in my portfolio. I have zero. Maybe I'll get one just in case, but it won't be a confident pick. I actually am taking more Gainwell towards the end for a couple reasons. I think he could possibly take the job from Sanders at some point. I mean, and then Boston Scott will be pesky in there too. And also, if it's the end of the year, why not get Gainwell some work, especially if you're not going to make the playoffs? He seems like he has more shots to play at the end of the year when you're actually trying to go deep in the fantasy playoffs.
For sure. And I'm okay with getting Miles Sanders, but I'll take David Montgomery and Chris Carson before them. And right now, at least in the ADP or around there, you're seeing Sanders go before both those guys. So if there's a situation where all three are on the board, Sanders is the last one to go. So I probably will end up fading him, not by default necessarily. I just like Carson and Montgomery more. But you mentioned Gainwell. I don't think I'm actually going to touch him. Even in a full point PPR setting, I think there's way too many mouths to feed in that offense. I mean, you think about it, they use that two tight end personnel probably more than anybody else in the NFL does, especially with Zach Ertz going to be around. They have guys like Rager and Devonta Smith as well, too. Hurts is going to be running the ball often, too. I don't know. Like, Gainwell's positivity is that he's going to be catching passes out of the backfield. How many times is that really going to be a possibility, especially when you still have Boston Scott there, too? I don't like anything to do with much of that offense, and I'm probably going to be fading most of the Eagles altogether.
Yeah, I mean, I like Rager, however we want to say it. I took him. I was informed that out of all our Rotowire invitational drafts, I was the highest on Rager, and it was just kind of having to go at the turn and then knowing he wasn't going to be back in 24 picks or whatever it was. So I took him. I actually don't have much Gainwell yet. I'm just saying that if you're going to take any Eagle running back at their price point, he's probably the one. I'm a lot more likely to take Gainwell at, like 160 ADP than Sanders at 34 ADP, 143 ADP for Gainwell. So I guess that's what I'm saying. Not that it's not something I'm aggressively targeting, but if you had to pick one at the price point, I think that's the way I'm going just because of the pure unknown upside, I guess.
Oh, fair enough. All right, let's dive into those guys that are over 200 ADP that you like, and we can start first with your player or players to go. But before we do that, I want to get a word from our sponsors in at Dynasty Owner. Are you tired of the same old fantasy football leagues that get canceled after a year or so? Well, if that's the case, Dynasty Owner has your back. Go to dynastyowner.com. New leagues for the 2021 season are forming now. Dynasty Owner unites the fun and excitement of fantasy football with the skill and strategy of the front office by incorporating a salary cap and real NFL player salaries for diehard fantasy football fans that want the real GM experience and also some fantasy parts of it too. Dynasty Owner adds a whole new level of strategy. Are you worried you won't be able to find anyone to play in your league with? Well, don't worry, because Dynasty Owner can help you fill your league with fantasy football enthusiasts like yourself. You won't have to worry about finding enough players. You can choose to start a league, join an existing one, or purchase a team from a previous owner. If you're serious about joining the big leagues, go to dynastyowner.com and start your Dynasty today. I'm, of course, in a Dynasty owner league right now. We have Jerry Donabini as well. That season's going to be starting up soon. I actually just got emails a little while right before we signed on of guys that were cut. I think there was one of them I'm actually be considering. So maybe if anyone's listening from the Dynasty Owner League that we're in, I'm not going to reveal my strategy, but let's just say I like that format quite a bit. Between that and Ottoneu, Ottoneu, who's been a sponsor in the past as well. I love both those formats. If you're doing other fantasy formats besides the standard stuff, I think they're great stuff out there for you. So let's go ahead and get to your top guy, at least from an ADP perspective. Again, we have 3 names that we mentioned, each of us. Guys over the ADP of 200 on the NFFC format. Is that dating back to the past 2 weeks or a week?
I've got it back to the past 2 weeks, and there's a couple reasons. Okay. There's a couple reasons I did that. Well, can I just say first, the top 200 is tough. We're talking 16 team leagues or 20 round best balls. We kind of just joked yesterday, like, yeah, we'll cut it off at 200 and it'll be fine. And then I started diving in outside the top 200, and it is ugly. Obviously, I'm not picking a defense. That's where all the middling defenses are. Right, but, you really have a tough time taking a guy. And then, yeah, we went instead of going from February 1st through now, we thought it'd be best to go for the last 2 weeks here, mostly because then you get guys like, Xavier Jones from the Rams that, that made a leap as he's looking to maybe be Henderson's backup, or some of those theme guys that would be a little too obvious. But I did feel like maybe I cheated a little bit on my first pick.
You always do.
See, in my head, it's a game. And the first thing in my head here, this dome, it's a game. And I try to find a way to game the system whenever I can. But this guy was 227 if you go from August 1st to now, and he's 222 as of the last 2 weeks today. And I hinted earlier on overreact to the preseason, and I'm going to go ahead and do that here with Malcolm Brown of the Miami Dolphins. He's a guy I might take as my last running back in even some 12-team drafts. Now, the Malcolm Brown news for those who aren't subscribed to our player updates or didn't catch their preseason game, he was the starter in preseason game 1, and Myles Gaskin kind of subbed in and worked with the second unit. All of Malcolm Brown's action was with Tua, and he wasn't particularly effective. But I think if this whole alignment continues, we might not see him outside the top 200 for now. So there's a couple things there. Obviously, skill and opportunity. That's a twofold that I always talk about here. The opportunity is looking like it's growing a little bit, and there is a brief history of Malcolm Brown being a viable red zone option, even if he's not getting, a ton more than 50% of the carries or whatever their split looks like here. But, so we'll just kind of start with his player profile, right? 28 years old. There hasn't been a ton of tread on the tires with a guy like Malcolm Brown, though, because he's always kind of played backup in the Rams years. And maybe he's starting to get his opportunity. Now, the contract doesn't necessarily suggest his 1 year, $1.75 million contract isn't crazy necessarily. That doesn't scream he's going to be the starter right away. But I think it's safe to say that he'll have a role here, and, he might be able to succeed. So as a red zone back here, in the last year, Gaskin had 12 touches inside the 5. He only converted 25% of them for scores. In 2020, Brown had 9 touches inside the 5 and converted 44.4%. And then in 2019, he had 8 and converted 62.5%. It's a little bit of a smaller sample size than most backs. I will give him that. But just for comparison, Derrick Henry's mark in 2020 was 45%, and Josh Jacobs was 28.6%. Two guys, you kind of maybe think of, as bigger, more powerful backs, and each of those guys had 20 attempts. So a little bigger sample size. And then, just physically in stature, Brown over Gaskin. Brown is 31 pounds heavier if you go by the listed roster weight. So I think if we can get him a few carries and he'll be a red zone vulture, I think, he could sneak in there and possibly lead the committee at some point during the season. And I haven't seen any backs outside the top 200. Again, top 200 is tough. It's a lot more difficult than you would think. I haven't seen any backs outside the top 200 that are even going to sniff that opportunity, barring a big injury. Of course, Chuba Hubbard's in the top 200, and there are other guys too. Your Darrington Evans types that are down there. That Alexander Madison, even, except he's a little higher. You can even say McKinnon. Put him in that group. Your backup running backs that need an injury to happen. The difference is that Brown doesn't necessarily need the injury to happen here. So at the price right now, which is is basically next to nothing. If you're in a deep league and need someone that could be potentially a viable starter, I don't think Brown's necessarily a league-winning pick, but he provides you some nice insurance. If one of your guys goes down, you're not scraping the waiver wire for someone you hope scores 5 points. You got someone who at least you can reasonably expect to score 10 points in a given week. So that's why I threw him out there. I don't know how long he'll be 222. Sleepers are tough. There's no such thing as a sleeper by draft day. So we're trying to do our best to dig deeper.
I mean, you're doing the deep sleeper. That's what this podcast is about. And I agree with you. Past 200, it's really difficult. You're listing backup running backs. The one that I end up getting, especially in those like 30 round NFFC best ball formats, Samaje Perine, who seems to be clearly locked in as number 2 back behind Joe Mixon. That's another option out there. But Malcolm Brown, it's a perfect case because it seems like the Dolphins want to have him factoring in the offense regardless as a backup capacity or not. And even as a specialist, and I think of the Chargers again because I cover them, Larry Roundtree, their 6th round pick. It seems like he is going to be just pigeonholed into this goal line capacity. And whether Justin Jackson or Josh McKelly wins the backup role doesn't matter. They're just going to have Larry Roundtree come run for 2 yards, whatever else. The good news about Malcolm Brown is we know he can do the 2-yard runs, but also he can be a pass catcher too, as we saw with the Rams offense in past years. I think he's a really capable, crappy player. And that might feel like a weird compliment sort of situation, but like no one's excited that Malcolm Brown is playing. I have way too many friends that are Rams fans, and everyone's like, oh, okay, Malcolm Brown's going to be a factor in Miami. All right, they're going to have a crappy offense. And that might be true. But when you're talking about past 200, it doesn't matter. You're looking at guys that might be having a factor that don't require injuries, and we can't project or predict injuries. So therefore, I'm looking for guys that can have that, especially in the running back position, which feels so difficult to find value even past round 5. Yeah, a guy like Malcolm Brown who's going to have some capacity in that offense, I think is a perfect name to mention.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, probably won't be taken in most 12-team leagues unless it's at the very, very end, but someone you should maybe put on the radar just in case.
Yeah, my top guy, at least from the over 200 ADPs, again, we're looking for deep sleepers for this podcast. Tyrell Williams, I have him ranked at like 160, 175 on our Yahoo rankings, which we do, which I now believe is a part of the Yahoo Plus package. So check that out if you get a chance. He's being currently drafted as like 236 overall, and I get it. Obviously, lines stink, right? There's 31 NFL franchise in the Texans. You could maybe say there's 30 NFL franchise, and then there's a Lions and Texans. I would not argue if that was the case. And it's awkward that I am so invested in a team that I think is so bad. In fact, I did the NFFC write-up, and Motor City Eagles actually asked me a question like, why do you take a running back and wide receiver from the same team? In this case, it was tight end TJ Hawkinson, especially the Lions. This isn't a high-powered offense. He's right. I mean, like, I don't have an argument for that necessarily, other than I think DeAndre Swift and TJ Hawkinson are going to occupy 65-75% of the underneath targets. I am not a believer in St. Brown at all as a slot guy, neither is Quintez Cephas, despite our UW-Madison roots to him. No, I think both are going to have just putrid numbers in that position, and I think Swift and Hawkinson do a lot of the middle stuff. But there are going to be opportunities outside, even with how bad Jared Goff might be at quarterback, opportunities outside. I do not believe Brashad Perriman is going to be that guy. I do think Tyrell Williams can be. Now, he's been banged up a little bit in training camp, but he's actually been very clearly the number one guy. I think if you look at the beat reporters with the Lions, it's like they're almost passing it off like, oh, yeah, Tyrell Williams is that good. It wasn't even a question. And I think that goes under the radar, especially if he's being drafted at 236 overall. Yeah, I think people are underestimating what Tyrell Williams can do. He was a guy that was able to work off of Keenan Allen. So if you're doing slants on one side, Tyrell Williams is doing one of those in routes, right? 10, 15 yards. He can run deep. He has the body ability. He's the ability to go up and get the catch with his body in those situations. I think he can run just about every route. And the Lions, like I said, stink. So they're going to have to pass a lot. And I think that's going to help. If Tyrell Williams gets 6 targets, he's going to get 4 for 60 yards. That's 10 points in a full point PPR. Mm-hmm. And you're getting that at like what, round 20, 25. I think that's way too good a value at the moment for Tyrell Williams. And he is going to be one of those guys that I have in just about every one of my teams. And if he stinks, great. I know who my first cut is. It's just that simple.
Yeah, you're right. I do agree with not having a ton of confidence in Brashad Perriman. I mean, he has the draft pedigree, but he has never caught more than 36 passes in a single season, and he's always, at least over the last 4 years, he hasn't played a full season since his rookie year. So I don't think they can count on him, even though he's technically listed as a starter on the depth chart right now. Rookie Amon-Ra St. Brown could be in the mix. I'm giving Quintez Cephas a little bit more credit than you are. I think if we had to do
name the best pass catcher from the Badgers in the last 25 years.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
It's Lee Evans, and it's not close.
Fair enough. I'm just saying that Tez was a guy that I can remember and even showed signs of it a little bit last year, that he can make big plays. So if the quarterback's in a tight spot, he's athletic enough to go up and get it a little bit, especially if he continues, on the first couple of years of physical progression. If we were doing deep sleepers outside of the top 250 in ADP,
Quintez Cephas, Jake's all aboard.
I would have nominated Quintez Cephas. He's one of my little honorable mentions I put at the end there. But again, this team is going to be bad. Maybe they'll have to pass a ton. That'll be great. But even if they're behind, can you really count on Goff to bring them back? So I like Tyrell Williams because he's getting slept on a lot after, missing all of last year. Mm-hmm. And
with the Raiders.
Yes. Yeah. Missed all of last year. So people are kind of forgetting about him, but he was at one point a pretty decent fantasy factor. I mean, his second season in the league, he caught 69 passes for 1,059 yards and 7 touchdowns. And he's 29 years old and, had some speed at one point in his career. Hopefully it maintains after the injury here. I see what you're talking about, Joe, and I understand why you'd consider a high upside guy like that.
Undrafted free agent too. I think Tyrell Williams has been a guy that's kind of made his way into the league and cemented his status, got the big contract with the Raiders. Obviously didn't live up to it, which is fine. It's because it's the Raiders. But I think he's going to be a really, really under the radar target that if you are in, I don't know, wide receiver 3 formats, you're probably not playing Tyrell Williams. And if you are, your team is not going to be very good. But I love the depth option, and especially in best balls. No one better take Tyrell Williams in our underdog leagues. I'm telling you right now, Brad or anybody else that's listening that I know I got you to sign up for this stuff, do not take Tyrell Williams because I want him in round 17. Jake, same for you. And I think he's going to present plenty of value in those formats.
Yeah, I'll probably take someone else ridiculous at the end.
Thank you. You could take Quintez Cephas.
I'll go with Tez. I'll save him for you. For the first one of those I did, I thought was 20 because I was used to all the old formats I've doing being 20, and I had Tez queued up, and then the draft just stopped after 18 rounds, and I was like, oh, dang. I guess I
broke his heart. How dare you?
I missed my guy.
Okay, give me your second guy as a deep sleeper option that you're looking at.
One guy I did take as my third quarterback in a best ball. This one's going to get pretty spicy here, I think, and that is Jameis Winston. His ADP is 219. He is not Chris Martin, who's listening on YouTube, you just wait and see there. Hang on, I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted by the comments.
Chris Martin's reading, literally reading our sheet right now because Blake Jarwin's a guy I like a lot too. I really liked him a lot last year.
So keep the comments coming. I mean, we're gonna get there. Hopefully, cover your guys. But I'm going Jameis Winston. I wanted to go to the quarterback position. I wanted to get us to mention one quarterback here. Listen, I had a hard time finding odds, but prior to the first preseason game, Winston in the sports books was listed as a -150 favorite to start week 1. So he's
easy
already
bet, by the way. I'm taking that money every time. Yeah.
And then he went out and he outplayed Hill. Now, naturally, he led 2 touchdown drives. Of course, he had 1 TD pass, and of course, naturally threw an interception, as Jameis does. Well, Hill produced 0 real life points on the scoreboard here. And not that it necessarily, the other note I had is, basically I'm making cases for why Winston's going to win the job. And the next thing I have is okay, the Saints have a pretty good defense here, but Taysom Hill, if they get behind a couple scores for any reason whatsoever, I don't think that Taysom Hill can bring them back necessarily with the type of player he is. Obviously he's not even anywhere near the level of Lamar Jackson, but even the Lamar Jackson quarterback type struggles a little bit if they get behind in a game. I don't see him leading monster comebacks here a little bit. And then you have a player that's a much, much lower caliber version of that. So I think Jameis, between the weapons that he has, the ability to dump off to Kamara, you're going to have hot, you're going to have cold, as long as your league's not one of those kind of revolutionary leagues that decide it's going to take 4 or 5 points away for interceptions, because we could have another 30 for 30 year. It would not shock me at all. But I'm taking Jameis. I took him as my third quarterback in a best ball. Now it's debatable whether you need a third quarterback in there, but because I ended up with Dak, Tannehill, and Jameis Winston. I took Jameis Winston at the end, and I took him over Deshaun Watson, just for example. is the decision that I had to make at the end. Do I take a real deep flyer on Deshaun Watson, who might not play a game, or do I take a flyer on a guy who's a slight favorite to start? ADP also suggests, at least what the consensus among fantasy folks is, that he will start. I like this team quite a bit. It'd be nice if we could get a better idea of when he'd have Michael Thomas to throw to at his disposal. Because again, a guy that he can, just get the ball in his hands and make plays. But, one of the best pass catching running backs in the game in Kamara, Traquan Smith, Marquez Callaway, they both seem like they're getting a little bit of hype. I think that Winston, for being the guy with his type of draft pedigree, right? And then going and sitting under Drew Brees for a year, learning the system, I think he's going to be ready to go. And I think he gives the Saints the best chance to win. And I mean, if you told me that he would start 16 games this year, I think he would get bumped from at least into the top 20, So
you've ruined two of my jokes. Hold on. Okay, so first off, and he got LASIK. How dare you forget the fact that he got LASIK? Yes, so that's going to help significantly.
How can I mention his name without without remembering that part? He can see that's a big part of being.
That's a huge part. And then if you said Winston starts 16 games, my thought is, does Taysom Hill start one of them? Because you are forgetting, sir, that we are now in a 17-game season.
Yeah, old habits die hard. I was calling the St. Louis Rams for a really, really, really long time.
You and my dad did the same thing.
And the San Diego Chargers. Those habits were hard to shake.
Nah, he does the St. Louis Cardinals, so he maybe outdates you on that one, which is probably good. I agree with you, and I'm right there on board. Actually, I've done so many deeper round best balls that the thought of Jameis Winston in round 18 doesn't even shock me. I've taken him around 17, and I followed him right up with Taysom Hill in the next round afterwards, because I think that Saints offense, just getting whoever is the quarterback, whether it be Hill or Winston, I don't think it's a waste of a pick in a best ball format. And in redraft formats, Winston makes a lot more sense to me, because I agree with you. He's the actual quarterback, and we know he has some talent. Yes, he makes poor decisions. Yes, he threw that pick in the preseason game 1, and I'm sure there's going to be more as we continue throughout the preseason. I don't think it matters. I think Winston's a legitimately good quarterback, and whatever Taysom Hill is, it's not going to be a guy that can lead that offense effectively day in and day out. One other point, NFC South, sneakily crappy division. You got the Buccaneers, who are arguably the best team, and I think they are the best team in the NFC and are certainly one of the best teams in the NFL. Then you have the Saints, who may or may not make it to the playoffs. I would take the under on 8 or 9 wins at this point with what they're looking like. And the Panthers and Falcons both could be candidates for top 10 picks. Those are 2 targets right there. That's 4 games against the Falcons and Panthers that you can say Winston's going to be producing top 20, top 18 quarterback numbers easily if he's starting. So I like that a lot. That's going to be another option where you can be happy to get him later on if he's your starting quarterback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What else that you're looking at there in terms of quarterbacks for that third quarterback guy? Do you take a risk on someone who maybe is going to be the starter at some point, or I don't know. I just think I'm a little more sure that Jameis gets that chance.
Oh, I am too.
A lot of those guys at his level. I mean, ADP, it's like QB 30 or QB 29 at this point.
Right. I'm completely there with you. I mean, maybe like a Derek Carr, who I think gets drafted a little bit before then. I think he's going to produce a floor that you'd feel comfortable with as a QB3. Yep. I'll take Winston over Ben Roethlisberger, and I think that's going the other way. And I'll take Winston over Tua Tagovailoa too, and I think Tua is going to be fine, but I just don't like the statistics. I think Winston's going to have more passing numbers overall.
We are definitely getting spicy here. And hey, listen, if it comes week 1 and Jameis Winston goes out and and just tears it up, throws 3 touchdowns. Listen, he'll be on our waiver wire show before week 2.
Cool. Before we get to my next guy over 200, again, deep sleepers we're trying to target, let's get a word from our sponsors. Sleeper. What do your fraternity brothers Steve, Katie from work, and your grandma all have in common? They're all waiting for that invite to your fantasy football league. I'm not sure if my grandma's quite there yet, but that's okay. There's no better way to hang out, no easier way to smack talk, and no more customizable platform to host your fantasy leagues than on Sleeper. Whether you have a redraft league or a dynasty league that's been around for 10 years, Sleeper has everything you need in one app, and incredible commissioner tools and customizations, built-in messaging, support for snake drafts, auction drafts, and best ball leagues, blazing fast news, stats, and scores, all in a beautifully designed mobile app and website that makes every other app feel like a horse and buggy. Sleeper is the fastest growing fantasy sports platform for a reason, and all the cool commissioners are switching to Sleeper and not looking back. Don't just take my word for it. Download Sleeper on iOS or Android and see for yourself. You have nothing to lose. It's free. In fact, we have a couple of my interns who have been pushing the Sleeper app as far as their leagues go too. So we have plenty of in-house support from Rotowire when it comes to the younger guys. Yes, they're all for Sleeper.
What is that first line in there, and your fraternity brothers?
Yeah,
So,
well, and your grandma, which I'm not sure my grandma's necessarily into fantasy football. That's fine. Bless her soul if she's ready to go do sleeper, which is fantastic. So another great sponsor for us as well. Let's actually get a word from our sponsors as well from Blue Wire. Okay, we are back now and finishing out the rest of our sleeper options here that we're targeting. You had one over Jameis Winston, and also you had mentioned Malcolm Brown. I had talked about Tyrell Williams, who's going significantly higher ADP wise for me.
I'm letting you have the wide receivers in this show.
Yes, thank you very much. And in fact, Chris Martin spoiled my other guy that I'm really high on right now, which is Marquez Valdes-Scantling, MVS. Yes, it's maybe a homer pick as a Packer fan that I am. And I feel less certain about how good MVS will be this year after the Packers acquired Randall Cobb, who I think is going to be a difference maker in this offense. But you're still talking about a guy, again, in best ball formats in particular, who has the ability to, I don't know, get 10 points literally on one play on a reception for 70 yards and a touchdown. That's what MVS's role is in this offense. And I think you saw towards the latter half of the season, that game against the Colts where he kind of came back, and of course they lost against the Buccaneers as well too. He had that big catch over the middle of the field. There's some trust gaining with Aaron Rodgers and MVS, and I think there's some confidence. No longer do I feel as a Packers fan watching that ball go to MVS and say, Stonehands is going to drop it. That still might happen, but I think MVS is kind of developing to that point. And you look at the past history for some of these wide receivers, Jordy Nelson, Devontae Adams, James Jones, all took around 3 or 4 seasons to develop into those guys that really were prime fantasy assets. What year are we now in with MVS as a Packers wide receiver? Year 4. I know that people shouldn't be excited about a year 4 wide receiver who's had drop issues like MVS, but if he continues to maintain his role as the deep threat and gets more confidence and gets more involved as just an intermediate pass catcher, I know there's Devontae, I know there's Randall Cobb, all the running backs, Robert Tonyan probably too. I think there's a guy that can easily get 800 yards and 40 to 50 catches, and that's like a floor. And the touchdowns part, it could be 8, it could be 10, it could be 2. I don't know. Like, it really depends on if he's able to catch those passes and not have the defensive pass interferences. This extra game, again, because Jake mentioned earlier, we are in a 17-game season, not a 16 game. That extra game could be a huge difference for the deep ball talent that MVS is. So I love him quite a bit as a guy being drafted outside the top 200 that can easily present wide receiver 45 value, which I think is tremendous.
Yeah. So I almost suggested, I almost took MVS for myself in this one. So Chris, you and me, we're all on the same page here with MVS. First off, I want to make the point that I think people in general are almost tending to overvalue what Randall Cobb's going to actually do this year for the Packers, right? Because the signing of Randall Cobb is really what pushed
the trade. What are you talking about? Aaron Rodgers had to force the trade.
Yeah, the side.
Don't roll your eyes at me.
So the Cobb bringing Cobb in seems to me is what pushed MVS and Lazard outside of the top 200 in ADP. Obviously, if Cobb's not around, he's there. I think people are overestimating what Cobb's going to do. Yes, Aaron Rodgers is the sole reason that they brought him back. You know, they're best friends. They have chemistry. They played together for years and years and years. But I don't know. In my eyes, Cobb is there to, 1, be a locker room guy, 2, mentor Amari Rodgers, their draft pick this year, and 3, just to kind of let things blow over with Aaron and make him happy. I don't necessarily know if Matt LaFleur is going to give him a ton of opportunities on the field. And I even in some of these deep best ball leagues, I just don't see a reason you would take Cobb, because we like MVS. He's obviously the younger guy. The drops, yes, 7 drops last year. That's most definitely a concern for MVS. But like you said, even Devontae Adams had some drop issues in his rookie year, and eventually that they got over it. So this can be overcome. Is what I'm saying here with MVS. And again, the numbers are getting better and better every year. His yards per target was 11 last year, which is great. His A dot is going to be, average depth of target. That's going to be among the league leaders every single year. So great for best balls for a couple of big games there. But I mean, he had, I guess there were a couple games where he didn't catch a ball towards the end, but he was relatively consistently involved in the offense to some degree here. And I think that'll stay, and you'll have some big games in there. It'll be tough to start them week in and week out unless you're in the deepest of leagues, because there might be a couple of stinkers in there. Or there might be a couple of games where, Devontae Adams carries things. They go up by 3-4 scores early, and then they don't need to take those deep shots as much in the second half here. But yeah, I agree. I think people maybe overreacted in terms of ADP to Cobb coming in. He's not going to have as much actual production as people might think. And that's leading to guys like MVS being overlooked.
Who's your last guy, your deep sleeper guys past round or ADP of 200 that you're looking to target?
Yeah, I went back and forth on this a ton, actually. I thought about throwing Tez in there, but I figured I'll just talk about Tez when you talk about Tyrell Williams. I thought about Terrace Marshall, but then I was like, I talked about him last week, and he's also risen up to 175, so he's not even
okay.
So he's not even outside the top 200
I would
anymore.
not have guessed that.
This is hard. I mean, people are again. There's no such thing as a sleeper in fantasy football. By the third week of August is seemingly the phrase that's happening this year. My brain thought about Darius Slayton. I was trying to rationalize it because I was like, okay, I've given some Kenny Galladay hate and why I think he's going to be a bust. What other receiver could actually be decent there? So I thought about that, but ultimately I ended up landing on a tight end. Like I said, you're going to have the wide receivers this show. I landed on Dan Arnold of the Carolina Panthers here. His ADP is 272, so he's way out there. I took him as my third tight end in the last underdog best ball I did, and here's why. He seems to already be the starter over Ian Thomas, number one, given he sat the first preseason game entirely despite no injury tags. So, that's a good sign. A 2-year, $6 million contract also suggests that they pretty much intended him to start. He had pretty much kind of had his breakout year in Arizona last year. He caught and converted all three of his red zone or his targets inside the 10-yard line, finished with 31 catches on 45 targets for 438 yards and 4 touchdowns. Extrapolate that over a little bit more playing time. Again, different team, different quarterback. So there is a little bit of that, but you also know in this offense, he is a primary pass catcher. You look at his snaps last year, he ran routes on 97.3% of his snaps. So he's not a guy they brought in to be a blocking tight end. He's a guy that they brought in to be a part of the offense here. And, you're going down this line here. You got Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore, Terrace Marshall, and I think, some of those guys, Terrace Marshall will be good. Again, I've always said that Sam Darnold is a better quarterback than people are giving him credit for, especially after his horrible run with the Jets. I think this is career resurgence time, and I think we might see him going to a 6'6", 240-pound tight end a few times in the red zone and a few times to potentially move the chains here. So there's a lot of target competition. I'll give it that. But, when you're looking down at tight end 30 and most of these are punt plays, he's somebody that, might get you a couple multi-score games here when it's all said and done.
So the only way you're drafting Dan Arnold is if you are doing those NFFC best balls 30 to 35 rounds and you're like, all right, my tight end 4 or 5. And the situations where people are listening to this podcast and thinking, yes, this applies to me, I can't wait to snap up Dan Arnold, are very limited. So I actually, not that I'm trying to pander to our audience, I don't know how many people are actually watching. If you are out there and have live capabilities of watching our podcast, jump in. And evidently I'm just going to be talking about you the whole time. But Chris Martin also mentioned Blake Jarwin as a beyond 200 ADP guy, and I love him a lot as a tight end. Normally when I'm taking tight ends, it's Jonnu Smith, Anthony Ferkshire, I'm still going after him, and even some Adam Troutman for the Saints. Like, that's my tight end 2 or 3 in most situations. So there's no need for me to go ahead and take a Blake Jarwin in that capacity because he's going after all of them. But I really believe Blake Jarwin, especially with the Cowboys offense this year, which looks like easily top 5 at this point, is going to have a capacity. Look at Dalton Schultz last year, 60 catches, 500 yards. How many times did we talk about Dalton Schultz as a pickup tight end throughout the shows last year?
Yeah, after Jarwin went down week 1,
exactly.
With how much Dak was throwing, on pace to set every single record.
Exactly.
That tight end in that offense definitely does something.
And I think Blake Jarwin is going to immediately take over for Dalton Schultz, and there's not going to be a situation with as many Cowboys stud wide receivers as they have where they're operating with 2 tight ends unless it's clearly a run. So Blake Jarwin as the starter, still getting a lot of those catches. If you want to just say a 1-for-1 comparison, we'll get those 60 catches and 500 yards that Dalton Schultz had last year. Fine. I think Jarwin, if he gets those opportunities, does even better than that. If Jarwin is a top 15 tight end next year, even top 12 next year, I will not be surprised in the slightest. I think there's very easy opportunities for him to move up into that range. So he's a guy, you talked about Dan Arnold, great in those deeper formats. I think Blake Jarwin, for a lot of people out there listening, even doing those underdog best balls that we're trying to push, I think is going to be a guy that around 18 selection that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, if he finished as a tight end 1 or, kind of a low end tight end 1 this year.
Yeah, starting against 12 team leagues, right?
Yeah. I wouldn't be wouldn't be entirely shocked, I guess. It just, if for nothing else, than being in the right place in the right time on the right offense. The only thing that I don't want to rain on the parade too much, ADP of 172 over the last few weeks.
Chris was cheating,
so
right? That's what it was.
We're not we're not slipping under the radar as much of that as we did. And maybe I set the number at 200 to be just way too deep to try to pick these guys, because we had a tough time there. But it's good that we got to talk in a couple other players from different tiers as well.
Well, I think this is a really good exercise, because in this situation, I'm taking MVS 50 picks higher. I'm taking Tyrell Williams 50 picks higher than his ADP. I think you're probably doing the same thing for Malcolm Brown, maybe at 50 picks, but 20 or 30, like a round or two, you are going to be aggressive on a Malcolm Brown. So if you're listening to this podcast and saying, who are my late targets, even in my friends and family 12-team leagues, I think those make a lot of sense, and why I like to mention it.
Even next week's our stake league auction. We need $1 players, $1 nominations at the end of the year to get the auction going and round out the roster, because we're both big advocates of spending a big percentage of your auction money on your starting lineup here, and filling out a lot of Justin Jefferson was a $1 player last year. At the end,
he wasn't in mine because I was. We have a smarter league than yours, but that's fine.
Yeah,
I'm not going to get upset about the other sides of the stake league coin, which is great, and that's a good precursor. Next week, the stake league auction will be taking place. I think we're doing the podcast afterwards, and despite Jake's refusal to talk about his draft, I'm going to talk about mine. I love the stake league.
Yeah.
I know other
we're
people
both in
too.
different sides of the draft here. Sometimes
we're going to discuss it.
Nobody cares about our fantasy leagues, but also
they do.
We can talk about we can talk about guys that we're higher or lower on than most, any surprise buys, and that'll lead us into other conversation. And we can mix in some auction strategy to make it helpful for the rest of our listeners out there. Let's see here, though. I think you have one more deep sleeper that you wanted to hit on.
I do, and I don't want to spend too much more time on it. We're already pushing longer on this podcast than we normally like to go. But I guess the other guy that I'm looking at from a past 200 range again is a deep sleeper, Nico Collins, rookie wide receiver for the Texans. We talked about how they're not even an NFL franchise. I will readily say that. And there are a number of players ahead of Nico Collins currently on the depth chart. We have Brandon Cooks, who could be fine, and that's even if it ends up being Davis Mills or Tyrod Taylor that's throwing the ball. Okay, Brandon Cooks can make sense as a 9th or 10th round selection. Afterwards, Chris Conley, Kiki QT. I feel like we've done that Kiki QT deep sleeper thing now for 4 years. I'm officially past the point where he's going to be relevant. Right?
I'll overlook him in the preseason, but then at some point, week 8, 2 of their 3 top receivers are going to get hurt, and they're going to need to throw to someone, and then Kiki will be somewhat of a PPR option. That's usually how it goes.
It's funny because they already have one of their top 4 guys in Anthony Miller, who they just traded for, dislocated his elbow in the preseason game. I would imagine he's going to miss some time, maybe not a lot of time, but some time.
It looks like I was just looking at him. He avoided structural damage. He dislocated his right shoulder.
Thank you. Right shoulder.
So it says he could be back week 1 or 2. Again, we'll see how that goes here, but maybe that gives some time for your guys to come up.
Well, it doesn't really matter. I think Anthony Miller and Kiki QT play the same position, even Chris Conley to some extent too. They have Brandon Cooks that can do outside stuff, but you look at the rest of that roster, there really is another guy that can be very clearly on the outside. I think even as a rookie, Nico Collins makes a lot of sense. Like, I'm pigeonholing snaps. You talked about opportunity and talent. Well, I think the opportunity is very present, and I think Nico Collins actually has the talent as well to make things happen. Now, 700 yards last year in college, 600 yards the year before that. It's not fantastic numbers, certainly, and it's not like Michigan's offense was like super prominent from a pass catching perspective. I feel like their quarterback play really limited a lot of those guys. Nico Collins has the body to be an effective wide receiver at 6'4", 215 pounds. And I think he's going to have the opportunity. Yeah. Does he have the talent? Well, I guess we're going to find out. But as a guy that's going past ADP of 200, I will gladly take the opportunity on that kind of rookie as opposed to a Devonta Smith in round 7 who already has injury concerns and might be in a bad offense like the Eagles.
I will say, if they need a jump ball guy, Cooks is 5'10", QT is 5'11", Anthony Miller is 5'11", Conley 6'3" at least. So, but yeah, I guess I could see where you're going with that. Right now, even wide receiver 3 or 4 on the Texans, I have a tough time. But if there's someone you need as a deep sleeper, I suppose you can put them on the radar. A lot of these guys that if you're in a 12-team league, maybe you don't draft them, maybe they go undrafted, but you can use your league's watch list feature. Just star them a little bit. It's the start of your watch list, guys that maybe you turn on alerts for to see how they've been doing. If they get more snaps than they thought, if an injury goes on ahead of them in the depth chart, then your waiver wire claims are already set before you have to do any research for that week. So a lot of these are watch list guys, or if you're like Chris in a 16-teamer, hopefully some of these guys help you out.
No, you draft Tyrell Williams. I don't care. You can just watch Jake's guys, but you draft Tyrell Williams. I think he's going to be a stud. But yeah, obviously I think this podcast, there's a certain So there's a certain portion of the people out there listening that might find this useful, which is great. But otherwise, it just gets you thinking. Whether or not you agree with our picks, that's fine. But thinking about who these guys could be your last round targets if you don't want to do kicker and defense or something like that. Just like who can be the people that fill those roles. And more than likely, these 6 individuals are going to be players we discuss throughout the season as we continue these free agent podcasts when the season ends up starting. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, if you're drafting this week, no need to draft a kicker. You can pick one up before week 1 if your league lets you. Draft one of these guys instead. Maybe you get a stroke of luck and some injury happens above on the depth chart. Maybe they come out and have an outstanding preseason game that forces them to shoot 20 spots up ADP late, and you've effectively buyed low. But there's that, and then there's also kind of the strategy, that we're looking at. We're looking at these guys' pedigrees. We're looking at their circumstances. What the strength ahead of them on the depth chart is. All these factors that you can look at, and hopefully we can get you into our thought process a little bit here.
Yep. That does it for us, the Rotowire edition of the NFL podcast, the Tuesday edition, I should say, of the Rotowire NFL podcast, of course, sponsored by WynnBET. Again, if you guys are still interested in doing some of these underdog leagues, we do have one going on right now, possibly have slots available. I'm not sure by the end of this broadcast or not if we will, but we'll be excited to do that. And we have next week's Stake League breakdown along with training camp edition as well, too, news and notes. A lot to follow as we continue on to get you set for the regular season and your fantasy draft. So thanks, everyone, for listening. We'll be back again next week.